I never really thought about my life in terms of big moments or grand changes. I was just living, an average office worker, just like hundreds of thousands of others out there, going through the motions. Wake up, get dressed, grab a coffee, punch in at the office, and repeat. The only break in the monotony was the occasional happy hour after work, but even those felt more like a formality than anything I looked forward to. I could dream of climbing the corporate ladder. Everyone dreams of that, don't they? But there was a certain resignation to my routine. No matter how many times I tried to push myself, something always held me back. I didn't have that spark of ambition, that drive to outsmart the competition, or to push the boundaries of what was possible. Instead, I found myself constantly volunteering for the tasks that no one else wanted. I'd fill in the gaps, meet deadlines, handle the mundane. No one ever asked much of me, and I never put much more into it. It was safe. It was comfortable, but it wasn't going anywhere. I think that's what I'd always wanted, to be honest. I didn't need a corner office or a massive salary. I wanted stability, routine, something I could count on. So, when my supervisor asked me to help out with an extra report on top of my usual load, I said yes without hesitation, even though I knew it would push me closer to exhaustion. I didn't know how to say no. It wasn't that I didn't want to. It was more that I didn't know how to assert myself. I didn't know how to demand more for the work I put in. And so, I continued as the guy who was always there, the guy who could be relied on to get the job done, but never the guy to get promoted. I had a few dreams here and there, like everyone else. I told myself that one day, I'd figure it out, that I'd somehow find the courage to make a leap, to change my life. But that day never seemed to come. I kept looking for shortcuts, some easy path to success, but there was none. There was just work. Work, home, work. A rhythm that had become ingrained, something I had almost stopped questioning. Maybe this was all I was destined to be. A regular employee in a world full of those who were more driven, more determined. But I never truly blamed anyone else. It wasn't their fault that I had settled into this life. It was my own doing. I had chosen this path. I had chosen to play it safe. That's how my life felt, safe. No thrills. No huge victories. Just existing, one day at a time. Isabella came into my life when everything seemed like it was in its right place. We met at a mutual friend's party, the kind that neither of us really wanted to go to, but somehow found ourselves at. There was something magnetic about her. She had a charm, a presence that made everyone stop and listen when she spoke. It didn't take long before we became inseparable. She had this way of making me feel like I was the most important person in the room, like I was the one who mattered. It felt good to be chosen by someone who had so much going for her. Someone so clearly ambitious, someone with the drive to succeed. At first, everything was perfect. Our dates were simple but meaningful. A walk through the park, a night at the movies, long talks over dinner. We shared our dreams and our fears, and for a while, I thought we had everything figured out. She was my partner in everything. And I was just happy to be there, content in our small world, believing that we had a future. We got married sooner than I had expected, but I didn't question it. Why would I? I thought it was a natural next step. I thought we'd continue to build something beautiful together. After all, we were in our early 20s, the world was ahead of us, and we had all the time to make it work. Or so I thought. But then, things started to change. It wasn't sudden. It was gradual, like the slow shift of the tide that you only notice when you look back. Isabella's ambitions were no longer about just us. Our lives, our shared dreams. Her goals became centered on herself. She wanted more. More luxury. More beauty. More things. She was no longer content with simple nights at home. She craved designer clothes, high-end beauty treatments, vacations to places I could barely afford. And here I was, stuck in the same office job, taking on tasks that no one else wanted. I could never seem to push myself beyond the average, beyond the comfortable. I knew what Isabella wanted from me, but I couldn't give it to her. I didn't have the drive to push forward. I was content, and she wasn't. The tension grew over time. There were arguments, silent ones at first, ones where she would drop subtle hints that she wasn't happy with the way things were going. And then there were the loud ones, where she would accuse me of not trying hard enough, of not being the man she needed me to be. She told me she wanted more, more excitement, more success, more everything. And I couldn't provide it. She would buy things, expensive things, and look at me with disappointment when I couldn't keep up. I'd try to justify my shortcomings, but deep down, I knew she was right. I wasn't the man she needed. I was too comfortable in my mediocrity, too content with the predictable routine of life, while she was out there chasing her own success. I think part of me knew the writing was on the wall. I could see the way she looked at me sometimes, like I wasn't enough, like I was a disappointment. But I never had the courage to face it. I thought I could fix it. I thought I could become the man she wanted me to be, the man she deserved. But no matter how hard I tried, I never measured up. Our marriage, once built on love, began to crumble under the weight of her expectations and my inability to meet them. The moments of joy became fewer and further between, replaced by frustration, silence, and resentment. I wasn't just disappointing her. I was disappointing myself. Still, I didn't want to let go. I thought if I just worked harder, tried harder, maybe things would turn around. Maybe I could fix this. But she didn't see it that way. One night, after a particularly heated argument about money and the life she felt she deserved, Isabella told me that she couldn't do this anymore. She needed more than I could give her. She needed someone who could provide for her, who could offer her the life she wanted, the luxury, the excitement. I wasn't that person, and I wasn't ever going to be. I begged her to reconsider. I promised her that things would change, that I would change. But she was done. And with that final word, she ended it. The silence that followed was deafening, and in that silence, I felt the weight of my failure. The divorce papers arrived a week later, and they were like a slap to the face, a stark reminder that I hadn't been enough. I was left with nothing but a broken heart and an empty home. Isabella, with her new life, was gone, and I was left to pick up the pieces of a marriage I had failed to save. It wasn't just the loss of her that hurt. It was the realization that I had been living in a dream, thinking that everything would work out, thinking that love was enough. But love wasn't enough. Not when ambition and expectations outgrew the reality we lived in. As she walked away, I couldn't help but feel like I had failed her, failed myself, and failed everything I had worked so hard to build. And all I could do was watch her go, knowing that I had lost the one person who had ever truly mattered to me. And so there I was, alone, broken, left with nothing but the remnants of a life I had thought would last forever. The days following Isabella's departure were the longest of my life. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly, each hour marked by an absence I couldn't ignore. Her absence was everywhere, lingering in the corners of the apartment, in the empty side of the bed, in the quiet moments I used to fill with her voice. The silence felt like a constant weight, pressing down on me, suffocating me. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape the fact that I had lost everything. I spent the first few days in a kind of haze, trying to function, trying to do the things I knew I had to do. I went to work, of course. I always went to work. But it wasn't the same. It felt empty, like everything in my life had lost its meaning. My coworkers noticed something was off, but they didn't ask. I wasn't the type to share personal details with anyone. I kept to myself, the same way I always had. The divorce papers arrived a week after Isabella left, and I felt like I was being handed a death sentence. It wasn't just the legal document that hurt, it was the finality of it. There was no going back. There was no fixing what had been broken. It was done. I signed the papers, feeling numb as I did so. There was nothing left to say, no words that could make any of this better. I had failed her. I had failed myself. I had failed us. I kept thinking about the last conversation we had, about the words she'd said to me before walking out the door. "I need more than you can give me, James," she had told me. "I need a life that excites me. I need a future that feels worth living." Those words cut deeper than any knife ever could. Because deep down, I knew she was right. I wasn't the man she needed. I had always been content with what we had, even though it wasn't enough for her. I had failed to see that she needed more than stability. She needed adventure. She needed the kind of life that came with ambition, with drive, with the ability to go after what you want, no matter the cost. I had never been that person, and I had never been able to admit that to myself until it was too late. The nights were the worst. that's when the loneliness hit hardest. I would lie awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our relationship in my mind. I thought about the early days when everything felt effortless, when we were happy, when we shared dreams of the future. But somewhere along the way, those dreams had started to slip away. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being the man she wanted me to be. I wasn't ambitious enough for her. I wasn't driven enough. I didn't have the spark that would have lit up the future we had dreamed about. And I couldn't fix that. I couldn't give her what she wanted because, at the end of the day, I wasn't sure I even knew what I wanted for myself. I had built my life around her expectations, around the idea of what we could become together. But in the end, I had only built a life of mediocrity, one that lacked excitement, one that lacked ambition. And it wasn't just her that had suffered because of that. I had too. I had spent years coasting through life, thinking that stability and routine were enough, but I was wrong. The truth was, I had never really been living. I had been existing, holding on to the comfort of familiarity, too afraid to take risks, too afraid to push myself beyond what was safe. But now, with the pieces of my life scattered around me, I had no choice but to face the truth. The truth was that I wasn't just losing Isabella. I was losing myself. The weeks after the divorce passed in a blur. I focused on work, burying myself in my tasks, trying to keep my mind occupied. But no matter how much I worked, it never felt like enough. The quiet at home was deafening, and the guilt of everything that had gone wrong hung over me like a dark cloud. I couldn't escape it. There were moments when I thought about reaching out to her, to try and fix things, to beg her to come back. But I knew I couldn't. It wasn't just the fact that she had left, it was that she had already moved on. I was just a part of her past now, a chapter in her life that she was closing, one she was eager to forget. And I wasn't sure I could blame her. I wasn't the man she needed. I wasn't the man I had wanted to be. I had let her down, and in doing so, I had let myself down too. One evening, about 2 months after she had left, I sat down to write a letter. It wasn't a letter to her. It wasn't even a letter to anyone in particular. It was a letter to myself, a letter to remind myself that, despite everything, I was still here, that I could still move forward. I wrote about all the mistakes I had made, about how I had let my fear of change hold me back. I wrote about the dreams I had once had, dreams of climbing the corporate ladder, of achieving something more than just a regular office job. I wrote about how I had stopped believing in those dreams, how I had stopped trying. And I wrote about the future. A future I was determined to build, one where I wasn't defined by what I had lost, but by what I could still achieve. It wasn't easy to admit, but I realized that I wasn't ready to give up on myself. I had spent so much time thinking that I was stuck, thinking that I was destined to live a life of mediocrity, but the truth was that I still had time. Time to build something for myself. Time to rediscover the person I used to be before I became so consumed by what I thought I needed. I folded the letter and put it in my drawer, but I never threw it away. It was my reminder, the thing I needed to remind myself that I could still start over, that I could still rebuild. It was a small step, but it was a step forward. When Isabella and I first got married, I thought that was it. Everything I needed, everything I wanted, was right there. I had a wife, a home, and the promise of a future. But in the end, that wasn't enough. And now, it felt like I was chasing something I couldn't quite grasp, something just out of reach. But I couldn't stay in this place of grief forever. I couldn't let the emptiness consume me. I had to find a way to rebuild, to create something out of the wreckage of my life. The first thing I did was take a long look at the apartment. It was small, but it had been our home for a while. It held memories, good and bad. The smell of her perfume was still in the air, and the ghost of her laughter lingered in the corners of the rooms. But I couldn't stay there, trapped in the past. It was time to make it mine again. I started with the little things, changing the layout of the furniture, rearranging the pictures on the walls. I took down the wedding photos, replacing them with neutral art that didn't remind me of what I had lost. I threw away the things I didn't need, the things that had become symbols of my failure. It was a slow process, but each day I felt a little lighter. Each day, I removed a little more of her presence from my life, and with it, I began to find myself again. But it wasn't just the apartment that needed to change. It was me. For the first time in years, I started taking a hard look at myself. I started asking questions I had avoided for far too long. What was I doing with my life? Why had I let it get to this point? Why had I stayed so stuck in the same rut for so long? The truth was, I had been afraid. Afraid of change. Afraid of failing. Afraid of taking risks. I had lived a life of safety, of doing what was expected, but now I realized that was never going to be enough. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine while I watched my dreams wither away. I enrolled in an online course for project management, something that had always intrigued me, something I thought I could be good at if I just applied myself. It wasn't a drastic change, but it was something. It was a small step toward proving to myself that I was still capable of growth, of learning, of moving forward. Every evening after work, I'd sit down at the small desk in my apartment and go over my lessons, working through the material, absorbing everything I could. It felt good to do something, to invest in myself again. It was the first time in years that I had felt like I had control over my future. But the road wasn't easy. I still struggled with the memories of Isabella, still fought with the guilt that I wasn't the man she had needed. I could hear her voice in my head, accusing me of not being enough, of not providing the life she had dreamed of. But I pushed those thoughts aside. I couldn't let her expectations dictate my life anymore. As the weeks passed, I started seeing the results of my hard work. I was getting better at my job, taking on more responsibilities, and even starting to be recognized for my efforts. It wasn't a promotion yet, but I was closer than I had ever been. I wasn't just another cog in the machine anymore. I was becoming someone who had something to offer. And then, one afternoon, I received a call from my manager. "James, we've been impressed with your progress lately," she said. "We're thinking about offering you a lead position on an upcoming project. We'd like you to take on more responsibility." For the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was the validation I had been seeking, the confirmation that I was capable of more than just being the guy who gets things done but never gets ahead. I accepted the offer without hesitation, a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. It wasn't the corner office or the financial freedom I had once dreamed of, but it was something. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I wasn't defined by my past mistakes, by my failures, or by the woman who had left me behind. But it wasn't just the job that had changed. I had changed. I had stopped waiting for things to happen and started making them happen. I wasn't going to let my past define me anymore. Over the next few months, I worked harder than I ever had before. I poured myself into the project, learning everything I could, proving to myself that I wasn't just someone who could sit by and accept mediocrity. I was someone who could excel, who could take on challenges and rise above them. I didn't hear from Isabella during this time, and to be honest, I didn't want to. I didn't need her validation anymore. I didn't need to prove anything to her. I was proving it to myself. I kept my head down, focused on the work ahead of me. There were days when I wanted to give up, when the pressure of it all felt overwhelming. But then I'd remember the nights I spent lying awake in that empty bed, the guilt that had eaten away at me, and I'd push forward. I wasn't going to be the man I had been before. I was going to be someone new, someone better. And slowly, but surely, I started to see the results. The project was a success. The recognition I had been craving came, and with it, the promise of more opportunities, more growth. I had done it, but it wasn't just about the work. It was about proving to myself that I could overcome my failures, that I could build something new from the wreckage of my past. I had learned something important through all of this. Life doesn't stop when things fall apart. You can rebuild. You can start over. And sometimes, when you've lost everything, you find out who you really are. And that's when you start to live again. It had been a year since Isabella walked out of my life, leaving nothing but a void where the future we'd once dreamed about had been. The sting of the divorce was still there, but it had dulled, like a wound that had started to heal but hadn't quite closed yet. I had made progress, work was going well, and I had a new sense of purpose. But there were still days when I found myself looking at the empty space where she used to be, wondering what went wrong, wondering if things could have been different. I wasn't looking for any more reminders of my past, but life had a way of throwing things at you when you least expected it. One morning, an envelope arrived. The kind that you don't get every day, cream-colored, sealed with an elegant emblem. I didn't recognize the handwriting, and for a moment, I thought it might be some sort of mistake. But as I tore open the envelope, I found the last thing I expected, a wedding invitation. Isabella's wedding invitation. I stared at the embossed letters on the card, my heart sinking before I could even process the rest of the words. She was remarried. I had expected it, in some distant part of my mind, but seeing it written in front of me, the formality of it, the cold finality, it hit harder than I imagined. Maxwell. The name was unfamiliar, and yet somehow it felt like an insult. She had moved on so quickly, and here I was, still grappling with the mess she had left behind. I was consumed by a mix of emotions, anger, confusion, a sense of helplessness, but also something I wasn't ready to admit, curiosity. Why had she sent this to me? Was it out of some twisted sense of guilt, or was she simply trying to rub it in my face? I couldn't tell, but there was something about this invitation, about the gesture of sending it, that felt almost mocking. Maybe she thought I needed closure. Maybe she thought it was the right thing to do, to let me know she was moving on. But why? What did she want from me? What was the point of this? For a while, I thought about throwing the invitation away, ignoring it, pretending it didn't exist. But I couldn't. I needed answers. I needed to understand what had happened between us, and this felt like the universe's way of making me confront the past. I decided to go. Part of me wanted to tell myself I was doing it for closure. Another part, the more honest part, knew it was because I needed to see her. I needed to see the life she had built without me, to see how easily she had slipped into this new world. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for, whether I wanted to find some sort of validation for my pain or simply to confirm the finality of it all. The night of the wedding arrived, and I found myself standing outside the venue, unsure of what I was expecting to find. The location was beautiful, an elegant, sprawling estate, the kind of place that was clearly meant for luxury, for people who had everything. It made sense, of course. Isabella had always wanted the best, and Maxwell clearly fit the bill. As I walked into the reception hall, I was struck by the opulence of it all. The flowers, the lighting, the carefully arranged seating. All of it screamed excess. I stood at the entrance for a moment, taking it all in, feeling a sense of distance from it all. None of this was for me. She deserved someone who could give her the life she wanted. James just couldn't keep up. I froze. The words hit me harder than anything else in that moment. I felt the sting of judgment, the harsh reality of my shortcomings laid out before me. These people didn't know the whole story. They didn't know that it wasn't just about money or luxury. It was about love, about connection, about building something real together. But Isabella had never wanted that. She had wanted the lifestyle, the flash, the admiration. She had wanted more, and I wasn't enough. I tried to shake off the sting of their words, but it wasn't easy. I felt the familiar bitterness rise up again, the anger that I had tried so hard to bury. But there was something else, something I hadn't expected. I felt nothing. I felt no desire to fight for her, no urge to convince myself that I could have been the man she needed. There was no more anger, no more heartbreak. There was only a sense of quiet acceptance. This was her choice, and I wasn't going to fight it anymore. I didn't need her approval. I didn't need to prove anything to her or anyone else. And for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. Peace. It wasn't much, but it was there. I looked around the room, seeing Isabella laughing with her new husband, her new life, and I walked away. I couldn't say I was surprised when I saw Isabella again at her wedding. In fact, as I watched her move through the crowd, it almost felt as though I had been waiting for this moment for a long time. It wasn't a sense of yearning or regret that gripped me. It was something else, something colder. The pieces of my life that had been scattered and lost over the years suddenly seemed to click into place. I stood at the back of the room, watching her, her every movement graceful and confident, as if she had always been the center of this world. Maxwell, her new husband, stood beside her, looking at her with admiration that I hadn't been able to provide. The chemistry between them was undeniable. It was the kind of love I thought we had, the kind that made everything else fade into the background. But that wasn't our story, was it? Ours had been something different, something less glamorous. And for the first time, I realized how much of it had been my fault. The guests laughed and clinked glasses, enjoying themselves, and I couldn't help but overhear snippets of their conversations. Some of them were talking about the past, about how everything had come together for Isabella. Some of them were curious about the divorce, asking questions in hushed voices, wondering what had gone wrong. I heard one woman remark on how lucky Isabella was to have moved on so quickly, as if her life had just snapped into place while mine had crumbled. But it wasn't just the gossip that caught my attention. It was what I overheard next, a conversation between a couple standing nearby, laughing as they discussed Isabella's former life. "I don't know why she ever married James," one of the men said, his voice dripping with condescension. "He could never give her what she wanted. She needed someone who could provide the lifestyle she deserved. And James, well, he never seemed to want that." My chest tightened as I heard the words. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. There it was again, the insinuation that I was never enough for her, that I had somehow failed, that I hadn't been the kind of man she wanted. I had spent so many years questioning myself, wondering if I had been too comfortable, too predictable for her. And in this moment, standing in the midst of these people who had never truly known me, I was hearing it all over again. "She deserves more than him," another voice added. "I always thought she'd end up with someone like Maxwell, someone who knows how to make things happen, someone who doesn't settle." And there it was, the truth, the cruel, biting truth that had been there all along, but I had refused to see. Isabella had never loved me for who I was. She loved the idea of what I could give her: stability, predictability, a steady job that she could depend on. But that wasn't enough for her. She wanted more, and I could never give her that. I stood there, frozen in place, as the laughter from the guests swirled around me. My mind raced with thoughts of the past, of the years I had spent trying to make her happy, trying to be the man she wanted me to be. I had tried so hard to be enough, to be the person who could provide the life she craved. But in the end, none of that mattered. She had found someone else who could give her everything she wanted, someone who could offer the life she had dreamed of, and I had nothing left. My gaze drifted back to Isabella, who was talking to Maxwell's parents. She looked happy, radiating the kind of confidence I had never been able to provide for her. She didn't look back at me. She didn't need to. I watched as she laughed at something Maxwell said, her eyes lighting up, her smile wide and genuine. It was as though the years we had spent together had never happened. It was as though I had never mattered at all. And that's when it hit me. She had never truly loved me. Not for who I was. Not for the person I had been. She had loved the idea of what we could be. She had loved the stability I offered, the promise of a comfortable life. But that wasn't love. That was something else. Something shallow. Something transactional. I had spent so many years convincing myself that if I just worked harder, if I just became more of what she wanted, she would love me. But I had been wrong. She didn't love me for me. She loved what I could provide. And when I couldn't provide it anymore, she left. I stood there for a long while, feeling the weight of the realization settle over me. There were no grand epiphanies, no dramatic confrontations. It was just a quiet acceptance of the truth. I wasn't the man she wanted, and that was okay. I didn't need to be. I turned and left the venue without a word, without a second glance. I didn't need to be a part of her life anymore. I didn't need to prove anything to her. The life I had been living had never truly been mine, and I was finally ready to step away from it. I was done living in her shadow, done being the man who couldn't measure up. I was ready to rebuild my life on my own terms. And as I walked away from that wedding, I felt something shift within me. It wasn't relief, exactly. It was something else, something deeper. I felt the weight of the past lifting off my shoulders, slowly but surely. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't broken. I was free. I spent the rest of the evening at Isabella's wedding feeling like an intruder in someone else's life. The sharp, suffocating realization that I was no longer a part of her world hung over me like a dark cloud, and no amount of mingling with the guests could shake it off. I wanted to leave, to escape the noise, to stop pretending that I was okay. But there I was, still in the midst of it all, watching her laugh with her new husband, seeing the life she had built without me. It wasn't until later in the evening, when most of the guests had moved to the dance floor, that I overheard something that would shatter everything I had believed about our marriage. I was standing near the bar, nursing a glass of water, trying to make sense of the emotions swirling inside me when I caught a snippet of conversation from two older women standing behind me. I never understood what she saw in James. One of them was saying, he was always so predictable, so safe, not exciting like Maxwell. The other woman laughed softly, the sound of it laced with judgment. Well, he was good for her at first. He provided, kept her stable. But she wasn't meant for that kind of life. She needed more. More adventure, more glamour. James couldn't give her that. The words were like a punch to the gut. I didn't need to hear them, but I couldn't escape them. They echoed in my mind as if I had been slapped across the face. I had always known, deep down, that Isabella had outgrown me. I had known she was disappointed in me. But hearing it from someone else, someone who didn't even know the whole story, made the truth feel so much sharper, so much more real. I tried to shake it off, to ignore the sting of their words, but it was impossible. What hurt the most wasn't that they were saying it. It was that I had heard it all before. I had heard it in Isabella's eyes, in her voice when she spoke about what she wanted out of life. I had heard it in the way she would sigh when I couldn't meet her expectations. I had known, for a long time, that I wasn't the man she needed me to be. But now, standing there in the shadows of their conversation, it was all coming together. Isabella hadn't loved me for who I was. She had loved the version of me that fit into the life she envisioned. Stable, predictable, someone who could provide for her. She hadn't cared about my dreams or my ambitions. She had cared about what I could give her. And when I couldn't give her what she wanted anymore, she had left. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my chest, the truth of it crashing over me like a tidal wave. She had never really been in love with me. She had been in love with the idea of a life we could create together, a life that she had outgrown once she realized there was more to be had. More wealth, more excitement, more everything. And I had been just a placeholder in her life, a person who was easy to fall in line with until she realized there was something bigger, something better. I looked across the room at Isabella, laughing and dancing with Maxwell, her arm draped around him as they shared a private moment. Her happiness was infectious, but all I could see was the distance between us, the gap that had widened over the years until it was too late to close. I had been nothing more than a stepping stone for her, a way to achieve the life she had always dreamed of. And now that she had it, I was no longer needed. I was just the man who had failed to keep up with her expectations. As the night wore on, the conversation that had haunted me earlier began to replay in my mind over and over again. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't pretend that what had happened between us was anything other than what it was. A mismatch of desires, a failed attempt to live up to a version of love that never existed. When the final toast was made and the last song played, I found myself standing on the edge of the venue, watching as the guests slowly began to leave, their laughter and chatter drifting away in the distance. I was supposed to be happy for Isabella. I was supposed to be glad that she had found the life she wanted. But instead, I felt empty. I felt like a ghost, watching from the sidelines, unable to find a place where I belonged. I wanted to leave. I wanted to walk out of that room and never look back. But I stayed. For one last moment, I wanted to see her, to see the woman I had loved so deeply, and accept the truth that I had been holding back for so long. But as I looked at her, I realized something else. I didn't need her anymore. Not in the way I once thought I did. The truth was, I had been holding on to a memory, to a version of her that no longer existed. I had been holding on to a dream that was never meant to be. I took a deep breath, knowing that it was time to let go. I had spent so many years trying to keep up with her expectations, trying to be the man I thought she wanted. But in the end, I was only fooling myself. I had to stop living for her approval, and start living for myself. I turned to leave the venue, my footsteps echoing in the hallway as I walked out into the night. The air was cool against my skin, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of freedom. The weight of the past, of Isabella's expectations, was finally beginning to lift. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't stuck in the past, mourning the life I had lost. I was free to build something new, something of my own. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. I had expected that leaving Isabella's wedding would bring me some sense of finality, but what followed that night was anything but closure. The truth about what had been happening in my life, and the realization that I had been living in a shadow for so long, still weighed on me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just lost. But that night, at the wedding, something unexpected happened. Something that would change everything. I had stepped outside for a moment, needing to clear my head, to get away from the celebration, the laughter, the crowd of people who didn't know me. The cool night air hit me like a wave, soothing the knot of emotions tightening in my chest. It was just the kind of quiet I needed, a moment of peace to gather my thoughts. But as I stood there, I felt a presence behind me. A voice, calm but authoritative, called my name. James. I turned to find William, Maxwell's father, standing a few feet away. He wasn't someone I had spoken to before, but I knew who he was. His presence seemed out of place here, at least to me. He looked around briefly, almost nervously, before stepping closer to me. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said, his tone tentative, but with an underlying urgency. "I've been meaning to speak with you." I didn't know what to make of it. His presence felt unexpected, like a random piece in a puzzle that didn't fit, but there was something in his expression that made me hesitate. I was already bracing myself for another uncomfortable conversation with someone who had no real understanding of the pain I was carrying, but William's next words stopped me in my tracks. "Are you James Walker, the son of Dr. Walker?" he asked carefully, his eyes scanning my face for some kind of confirmation. I nodded, still unsure of where this conversation was heading. William's face seemed to pale a little as recognition set in. He stepped forward, his posture stiff, but then his shoulders slumped as though some weight had suddenly landed on him. He looked as though he had just come to realize something heavy, something significant, and he couldn't escape it. "I never expected to see you here," William said, his voice softer now. "It's a bit ironic, really." I was taken aback by his words. Irony? What could he possibly mean? I was ready to dismiss him, to walk away from yet another awkward encounter at a wedding that had already drained me, but there was something in his voice that kept me there. "Why ironic?" I asked. Curiosity overcoming William hesitated, his hands shifting nervously as if he was unsure of how to continue. There was a look of discomfort on his face, as though he were about to reveal something deeply personal, something he had carried for a long time. "Because your father," he began, his voice trailing off as if gathering his thoughts. "Your father saved my son's life. Maxwell's life." I blinked, caught off guard by the words. Maxwell's father? Saving Maxwell? I had known Maxwell for only a short while, just enough to see that he had everything I never did. Confidence, ambition, success. He was Isabella's future now, her new life, and I had been nothing more than the backdrop to their past. The man standing before me, though, was a figure from Maxwell's life who I had never once considered. It felt so surreal, so out of place to think of my father in this context. "You, what do you mean?" I stammered, my pulse quickening. This conversation was suddenly spiraling in directions I wasn't prepared for. William took a deep breath, seemingly weighed down by a burden he had been carrying for years. His eyes looked away from me, and for a moment, it seemed as though he were gathering strength to speak the truth. Many years ago, Maxwell was involved in a serious car accident. He was on the verge of losing his life. "James," William explained, his voice thick with emotion. "Your father performed a life-saving surgery, one that no one thought would work. It was a critical situation, and without his skill, Maxwell wouldn't have made it. He didn't just save my son's life, James, he gave me my son back." I stood there, stunned. I had no idea. I didn't know my father had played such a pivotal role in someone else's life, let alone Maxwell's. I had always seen my father as someone quietly devoted to his work, his patients, but never had I known the extent of his impact. Maxwell's father looked down at his hands, his expression becoming more somber as the weight of his confession grew heavier. "Afterward, I promised your father I would repay the debt. I promised I would do anything in my power to show my gratitude, William continued, his voice wavering slightly. But after your father passed away, I lost touch with you, James. I lost track of everything. And now I realize how much time has passed and how much I still owe to you. The air around us felt thick, and I could hardly process what I was hearing. My father had saved Maxwell's life, and now, standing before me, was a man who felt indebted to me because of that? The irony of it was almost too much to grasp. I had always believed that the world my father had been a part of was distant from mine, clinical, detached, wrapped in the sterile environment of hospitals and operating rooms. I never realized how deeply his influence had stretched, how his kindness had reverberated beyond just our family. The world had always seemed like a place where things happened by chance, where we drifted along, caught in the flow of events. But now, with William's words, I could see how interconnected it all was. How everything had meaning, even the most unremarkable moments. And now, that connection was coming back to me in the most unexpected way. William's gaze met mine, filled with genuine remorse. I don't know how to make up for all the time I've lost, for the debt I still owe to your father, he said, voice thick with regret. But I want to make it right. I want to make sure that you, too, can benefit from what he did. I know it's not much, but I want to help. I want to repay this debt. I stood there in stunned silence, trying to make sense of everything. My father had saved Maxwell's life, saved the man who was now married to my ex-wife, living the life I had always dreamed of. It felt like the universe had somehow conspired to bring me back to the very thing I had been running from. And now here was Maxwell's father, offering me something I had never expected. An opportunity. William reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. He handed it to me, the weight of his gesture tangible in the air between us. Take this, William said quietly. It's my personal number. I don't know what kind of help you need, James, but I can help you. I owe it to you and your father. I took the card, though I had no idea what I was supposed to do with it. But in that moment, I realized that maybe this wasn't just a coincidence. Maybe this was the moment I had been waiting for, the chance to build something new, to take back what had been taken from me. I had spent so many years thinking I wasn't enough, thinking I couldn't change my life. But now, it felt like the door to something new had opened. I don't know what to say, I said quietly, looking at the card in my hand. I didn't expect this. I didn't expect any of this. William gave me a weary smile. I didn't expect it either. But sometimes life has a way of making us face the things we avoid, the things we don't want to deal with. I nodded, still processing everything. The weight of his words wasn't lost on me. I had avoided so much of my life, so much of the potential I had inside of me, because I had been afraid. Afraid of failure. Afraid of never being enough. But now, here was an opportunity. A chance to step into something larger than myself, something bigger than the life I had once settled for. I'll think about it, I said, though I knew deep down that I would have to take that step. I had to. As William walked away, disappearing into the crowd of guests, I stood there, alone again, but not quite as empty. Something had shifted inside me. There was a path forward. Maybe it wasn't going to be easy. Maybe it wasn't going to be perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had a choice. The weeks following the wedding were a blur. I kept replaying my conversation with William in my mind, the shock of it all, the way he had opened up to me in a way I never expected. It felt like a strange twist of fate, a turn in my life I hadn't seen coming. But as much as I tried to focus on the future, a part of me couldn't stop thinking about the past, about Isabella, about Maxwell, and about the life I had lost. And then, one evening, just as I was starting to feel like I could finally breathe again, I received a message from an unexpected source. Maxwell? It came as a simple text, just a few lines of words, but they carried a weight that I wasn't prepared for. It wasn't long after I had finished work, and I was sitting in my apartment, quietly processing the progress I had made in my life so far. The text felt like an intrusion, a reminder of the past I had been trying to leave behind. James, I know this may come as a surprise, but I wanted to reach out. I'm sorry for everything. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I wanted to apologize. You deserve to know the truth. I stared at the screen, my thoughts spinning. The words themselves were simple, but the implications were staggering. Apologize? For what? What had Maxwell, of all people, possibly owed me an apology for? He hadn't done anything to me directly, not in a way that could be pointed to, at least. He hadn't been the one who ended our marriage. But I knew better than anyone that an apology wasn't always about being directly at fault. It was about taking responsibility for the way things had played out, the way people had been hurt along the way. But this was different. Maxwell wasn't the one I had spent years with. He hadn't been the one to lie to me, to deceive me. He wasn't the one who had left me behind. He was simply the man who had moved in when I had been left out. Still, I felt something in me stir as I read the message again. It wasn't anger, not like I would have expected. It wasn't the fury I had been so accustomed to. It was a mix of something more complicated, something like curiosity. He owed me nothing, and yet he had reached out. He had taken the time to send a message when he could have easily chosen not to. I responded after a few moments of thought, a simple message, just a few words to keep the door open, just enough to acknowledge his attempt to make things right. I appreciate the apology. It means more than you know, I wrote, though I wasn't sure what it meant for me or where it would go from here. But I think we both know that things are different now. There's no going back. I didn't expect him to respond right away, and truthfully, I didn't know what I was hoping for. There was so much baggage between us, so much left unsaid. But when my phone buzzed with his reply a few hours later, I couldn't ignore it. I understand, the message began, but I feel like I owe you more than just words. I know I've been part of the reason for the damage, and I want to make up for it, in whatever way I can. The bluntness of his words hit me in a way I wasn't ready for. Make up for it? What did that even mean? Could anything really make up for the mess we had made? For the way our lives had spiraled out of control? I didn't know if there was any way to fix the past. I didn't know if anything could truly make things right. But as I read his message again, there was an honesty in it that I couldn't ignore. Maybe it was because I was tired of fighting. Maybe it was because I was tired of holding on to grudges that I had no power to change. Maybe it was because, for the first time, I was seeing him as a person, not just as the man who had taken my place in Isabella's life. The next few days were a blur of emotions, and I found myself thinking about Maxwell's apology more than I cared to admit. It didn't change the past. It didn't fix what had been broken between Isabella and me, but it did something else. It made me realize that I couldn't keep carrying this weight. I couldn't keep living in a world where I was angry, where I held everyone accountable for my unhappiness. I was tired of feeling bitter. I was tired of hating. I was tired of dragging the past with me everywhere I went. That's when I decided to reach out. Not just to Maxwell, but to myself. I sent him a final text, one that I knew would close the door on everything we had been through. It was time to let it go. I don't think there's much more to say, I typed, slowly. I'm moving forward. I need to let go of the past and focus on what's ahead. I knew it wasn't just about Maxwell. It was about me. It was about finally taking control of my life, letting go of the anger that had defined so much of my existence. I couldn't hold on to the things that had hurt me anymore. I couldn't stay in the past. And, to my surprise, Maxwell replied, "Understood, James. I'll always be grateful for your father, and I hope one day we can both move on. Take care of yourself." It was a simple response, but it was enough. For the first time, I felt a sense of peace, an understanding that the past was the past, and there was no point in dwelling on it. I had spent so long carrying around the weight of everything I had lost, but now, it was time to let it go. I wasn't the same person I had been before, and I wasn't the same person I had been when I was married to Isabella. I had learned to let go of my need for closure, to let go of my need for validation. It was time to move forward. And so, I did. The days following Maxwell's message felt like a new chapter in my life, one I hadn't expected to begin. His apology, though simple, had been the catalyst for something inside me to shift. I no longer felt the overwhelming bitterness that had clouded my thoughts for so long. It was as if something had clicked into place, and I could finally see that the path forward was mine to choose. But I didn't realize how much more change was waiting for me just around the corner. A few weeks after our brief conversation, I received an unexpected call from William, Maxwell's father. I had thought our interaction at the wedding would be the end of it, but apparently, I was wrong. When I saw his number pop up on my phone, I hesitated. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go back down that road of guilt, debts, and things better left behind. But something told me that this call was different. I answered. "James, I hope you're doing well," William said, his voice warm but strained. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something important." I shifted uncomfortably in my chair, unsure of what he was about to say. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "I know it's been a while since we last spoke, and I want to say again how sorry I am for not reaching out sooner," he continued. "But there's something I need to tell you, something I think you should know." I leaned forward, a mix of curiosity and wariness bubbling up inside me. "What is it?" "Well, Maxwell and I have been talking a lot about what we can do to make things right, about how we can repay the debt your father's life-saving surgery created. And after some discussion, we've come up with something I hope you'll consider." I sat back, processing the weight of his words. Repay the debt? I had thought that William's gratitude was simply a matter of feeling indebted to my late father, but now it seemed like he was offering something more than I had expected. "James," William said, his voice more determined now, "we want to help you. We want to invest in your future." I blinked, unsure if I had heard him correctly. "Invest in my future?" I repeated. "What do you mean?" "Maxwell and I, well, our family. We've been in a position to offer significant financial backing to a few select businesses recently. And after learning more about your work and what you've been doing, we believe you have great potential," he explained. "We want to help fund your project, James. We want to invest in your career and give you the opportunity to grow in ways you haven't had the chance to before." I felt the words sink in slowly, each one carrying more weight than the last. I had never expected anything like this. Never expected Maxwell's family, who I had viewed as nothing more than the barrier between me and the life I once had, to offer me help. I wasn't sure how to respond. Was this real? Was I being offered a chance to take a step forward, to grow beyond the stagnant existence I had been living? A part of me wanted to refuse, to say that I didn't need their charity, that I didn't need to rely on someone else's generosity. But the other part of me, the one that had been too afraid to take risks, recognized an opportunity when it was laid before me. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my nerves. "I don't know what to say," I admitted. This is unexpected." "It's not charity, James," William reassured me. "It's an investment in your potential. You have more to offer than you realize. And we believe you can go far. But we can't do this without you. We need you to believe in yourself." The words hung in the air. I couldn't deny that part of me wanted to turn it down, to prove to myself that I didn't need anyone's help. But another part of me, the part that had spent so many years questioning my worth, realized how foolish that would be. This wasn't just about the money. This was about the opportunity to finally break free from the limitations I had placed on myself. This was a chance to prove that I could be more than the man I had been, more than the man who had always just gotten by. "I'll do it," I said, surprising myself with my own resolve. "I'll accept. But I need to be clear, this isn't about just the money. This is about me proving to myself that I can succeed. I'm not looking to live in anyone's shadow. I want to build something of my own." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I wondered if I had said the wrong thing. But then William spoke, his voice filled with pride. "I believe in you, James," he said quietly, "and I think this is the right step for you. We'll make it happen. We'll help you get where you want to go." For the first time in a long time, I felt like something had shifted. It wasn't just the promise of financial backing. It wasn't just the chance to prove myself. It was the realization that I wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't stuck in this cycle of feeling small, of feeling invisible. For the first time, I had an opportunity to step into a world where my potential was recognized, where my efforts would finally matter. We talked for a while longer about the specifics, about how the funding would work, about the plans for the future. I hung up the phone with a sense of determination settling in my chest. This was it. This was my chance to turn everything around. I didn't have to live in the shadow of my past anymore. I had the power to shape my own future. And with that realization, something inside me clicked. The years of doubt, the years of feeling like I wasn't good enough, all started to fade. I wasn't just a man broken by his past anymore. I was a man with a future that was mine to create. I would take this opportunity. I would make the most of it. And no matter what happened, I would prove that I was worth this chance. As I sat back in my chair after hanging up with William, the weight of the conversation hit me in waves. I could feel the pulse of something shifting inside me, something I had almost forgotten existed. Possibility. It had been so long since I allowed myself to believe in it. But now, with this unexpected offer, everything seemed different. The landscape of my life was changing, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. I had spent so much time resenting my failures, so much time looking back at what I didn't have, that I hadn't even noticed how much potential I had been sitting on. Maxwell's family offering me this chance wasn't just about their generosity. It was a reminder that I had worth, that I had something to offer. It wasn't about the money. It was about the opportunity to break free from my own limitations, to step out of the shadows of my past. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew I had to take this seriously. I couldn't squander this chance. I owed it to myself to at least try. I spent the next few days in a whirlwind of thoughts and decisions. I had a lot to think about, things I hadn't even considered before. This wasn't just about accepting a handout. This was about aligning myself with something bigger, something that had the potential to change the course of my life. I needed to have a plan, a strategy. I couldn't just take the money and assume everything would fall into place. The idea of business and management had always intrigued me, but I had never given myself the chance to dive in headfirst. I had always played it safe, stuck to my day job, keeping things comfortable and predictable. But I wasn't that person anymore. I couldn't afford to be. I began to research, poring over books and articles, taking notes on everything that could help me develop the skills I needed to succeed. Maxwell's family wasn't offering me a handout. They were offering me a partnership. A partnership meant trust. It meant responsibility. I had to prove that I was capable, that I could handle the weight of this opportunity. By the end of the week, I had created a detailed plan for the future, a roadmap of how I intended to use the financial backing I was being offered. I had to start small, build a foundation that would allow me to expand. I focused on what I knew best, the areas I had experience in, and began laying the groundwork for my own business venture. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick, but it was going to be mine. That night, after I had completed my initial plans, I sat down in my apartment, looking over the papers I had written. The apartment felt different now, less like a place to hide from my past, and more like a space to build something new. My surroundings had changed, and with that, so had I. There was no more holding on to the mistakes and regrets of the past. I had a chance to write my own story, and I wasn't going to let it slip through my fingers. But as I worked through the night, I couldn't help but think about Isabella. It had been months since we last spoke. I hadn't heard from her at all since the wedding, and honestly, I didn't expect to. I didn't need her approval, didn't need any validation from her. But there was still a part of me, no matter how much I tried to suppress it, that wondered what she thought about all this. What would she say if she knew? I shook my head, trying to clear the thoughts from my mind. Isabella was a part of my past. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. I had spent so much of my life trying to keep up with her expectations, trying to be someone I wasn't for her. But now, I was doing this for myself. I was building something real, something that had nothing to do with her, nothing to do with Maxwell, and everything to do with who I was becoming. The next morning, I sent William an email, outlining my plans and what I hoped to achieve with his family's support. I wanted to show him that I wasn't just some guy who had been handed an opportunity. I was someone who could take that opportunity and turn it into something meaningful. It was time to prove to myself that I was capable. Days turned into weeks, and the reality of what I was doing began to settle in. There were moments of doubt, of course. I found myself questioning whether I was truly ready for what I had taken on. Was I capable of running my own business? Was I good enough to prove that I deserved the chance I had been given? But I couldn't allow those doubts to hold me back. Every morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in years. I worked tirelessly, reaching out to potential clients, refining my plans, and building the foundation of the business. And slowly but surely, things began to take shape. I wasn't where I wanted to be yet, but I was closer than I had ever been. One day, while sitting in my office, reviewing contracts and planning my next steps, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was from William. "James," he said, his voice warm and encouraging. "I've been following your progress, and I have to say, I'm impressed. You've done a great job with the groundwork. We're all on board. Let's move forward." His words hit me harder than I expected. It was one thing to get an offer, to be given a chance, but it was another thing entirely to have someone believe in you, to have someone say that they saw potential in you, that they trusted you to take the next step. It was a validation I had been missing for so long. "You won't regret this," I said, my voice filled with newfound confidence. I meant it. I wasn't going to let this opportunity slip away. As I ended the call, I sat back in my chair, looking out the window at the city below. The future, which had always seemed so uncertain, was now filled with possibilities. I wasn't stuck anymore. I wasn't the same man I had been a year ago, the one who had spent his days drifting through life. I was someone new, someone who had the strength to build, to grow, to prove that I was worth everything that had been handed to me. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just moving forward for the sake of it. I was moving forward for me.